a second, as I always do, just double check on the side that this is going. I feel like I'm always having tech issues, but it seems like making sure. Welcome. Just let people come in. I am just checking on the side, except that's not working. Checking to make sure that we are actually live, and it seems like we are probably good to go. Okay, awesome. So, welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Excited to be here with you, and excited to be joined by my guests who we're going to have talking with us today. And so, before I let you speak, I'm going to speak about you for a little bit. It's always fun, I know, hearing somebody read about you. But we're joined today by Gena Cox, and she is a fellow organizational psychologist, executive coach, author, and speaker who blends research insights and real-world experience to help leaders enhance their influence and impact. She wrote the book Leading Inclusion, which is an award-winning guidebook for building inclusive organizations from the top down. And she values human-centered leadership, and these ideas underpin her guidance to leaders as they respond to evolving stakeholder expectations. She, over time, has worked with leaders in organizations such as IBM and Perceptics to advise leaders in Fortune 500 and other large global companies to build psychologically healthy and engaging organizational cultures that drive business outcomes. She volunteers a lot. She volunteers for the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology, and is also serving on the National Women's Hall of Fame 2023 Inductee Selection Committee, and has been featured in numerous places such as Harvard Business Review, Fortune, Fast Company, and more. So that is just a little bit about Gena, but I'm not going to steal all the thunder. I'll let you speak about yourself as well. So welcome, and thanks for being here with us today.
Oh, it's really a pleasure to be here, Sertrice. In fact, you may not know this, but among the industrial and organizational psychologists that I've come to know over decades of doing this work, you and your colleague Victoria are amongst the shortlisted that I always get this big smile when I see you show up. Some of that just comes from all the energy that you project towards me and towards the world with your positivity. Some of it, though, comes from the delight that I get at knowing that there is another generation of IO psychologists who have ideas and experiences that are going to broaden the perspective in our profession. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Excited to have you with us. So, like I said, I'd love if you would just tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your background and the work that you do.
I'd be delighted. I think the number one thing that people need to know about me is that I'm a mother. And the reason I mention that, even though my daughter is an adult at this point and probably wonders why do I bother to bring her up, is that motherhood really informs everything that I do. And I have been amazed at how it has really given me more of the courage and bravery that I have needed to say things, because now I think about this next generation all the time. But, I'm trained as an industrial and organizational psychologist at the University of South Florida. Go Bulls. Wally Borman and Paul Spector are two of the people I always give a shout out to, because they have sort of created that foundation for me. But I came to the United States as an immigrant. I was born in England. I grew up in Barbados, and I didn't come to the country till I was about 20 years old. And when I got to this country, and this is relevant to what I'm about to say about, the professional stuff. When I got to this country, I had a big epiphany. I realized that the Gena that I thought of, my awareness of who Gena was, I had to sort of tweak that a little bit or think a little bit differently, because people reacted to me a very different way in the United States than they did when I was in the Caribbean. And I hadn't thought about that in advance. And the difference in that reaction had to do with what I recognized to be that when a Black woman shows up in any space in America, there's a perception of her that is sort of like a stereotypical idea, an avatar of who a Black woman is and what does she care about, how will she speak, how will she behave, how useful will she be in the world. And I'll be honest with you, that perception, the feeling I got was more negative than positive. And I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. What do you do with that? You take that and you say, oh, well, that's good to know. I'm not going to let that control my life, because I'm here to do excellence. I'm like, that's my world. My world is about excellence. That's all I care about. So everything that I will do in my life going forward, especially knowing this, is going to really be just to sort of say, you know what, you can think whatever you think, I'm going to be excellent. That relates to the work that I do today because, yeah, I'm a classically trained IO psychologist and did all the assessment and selection and stuff and measurement stuff and psychometric stuff and statistical stuff that IOs love to do. But ultimately, as time went on, I often found myself in situations where, as I was advising leaders in organizations, which is what I did for decades, they never looked like me. And I used to sort of be observing myself in these interactions, giving advice, and noticing that the leaders weren't particularly interested in one sliver of that advice, the piece that had to do with inclusion in the workplace, which is something I've always cared about, even though it wasn't my primary focus all along. And so when Breonna Taylor was killed in March of 2020, because I think I am a mother, I had a profound emotional reaction to that. It really, it's something I could not have predicted. And so by the time George Floyd was killed in May of that same year, I said, well, Gina, what can you do to be a part of the solution instead of just having these great ideas and being a bit of a fake, fraud, and phony because you're not really overtly expressing them? What can you do? So I wrote a book called Leading Inclusion. And so Leading Inclusion, I mentioned it now, relates to the work that I do in general, which is advising leaders about how they as individuals can be more impactful and influential and how they can build inclusive organizations.
Yes. No, I love that. And I'd love to dig a little deeper into how you think about inclusion. So I know when Victoria and I talk about it, we're really strong fans of thinking of inclusion as a behavior. It's a verb. It's what you do, right? It's an action. So making sure that what are the behaviors we're expecting of people? I feel like so often in the DEI space, people get scared off because it's all about like, here's all the reasons you're a bad person. Yeah. So we want to make sure they have the tools to know, like, what should you be doing, right? How can you improve that environment? And that's why we love leaning into inclusion. And why I love talking with you and looking into your work, because I know inclusion is important to you as well. So since we're on that topic, tell me more about how you define inclusion and how you think it should be showing up in the workplace.
Yeah, I have a very specific point of view on inclusion. The very first thing I like to tell leaders is, people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they love to put those three words together. But I say that inclusion has to be the foundation on which everything else is built. You can't build a diverse organization. Well, yeah, you can hire a diverse workforce, but that diverse workforce that you hire will not stay in your organization if you don't have an inclusive culture. Because when I think of inclusion, what I'm thinking about is the day-to-day experiences of individuals as they work together in an organization to accomplish some business goal. And that means that inclusion is all the stuff, and that the major driver of the inclusion experience is the behavior of leaders in the environment where an individual operates, as well as the colleagues in that environment. So when I think about inclusion, I think of it as a foundation, a carpet that senior leaders, board directors, and so on either do or do not create in an organization that lets me have an experience in which I can really thrive. So that's my point of view on inclusion. And clearly, I believe that inclusion tops diversity.
Yeah, I think that is something that we have. In general, we as DEI practitioners have been working so hard to dig into, right? Yes. By default, people think of the word diversity. It's one that has been around for a while and has been looked at. That's where EEOC and affirmative action comes into play. And so we want to play that numbers game. And it's for sure important to know, but diversity is just a fact, right? It exists or it doesn't. But if we're talking about how can we achieve it, how do we retain it, create an environment where it can happen, that leads us into, like you said, the inclusion and equity piece. So it makes more sense in like, what can we be doing versus what are we just measuring, just measuring the diversity that exists. So.
Exactly. Yeah. After George Floyd was killed, I noticed organizations made a really common error, which was the number one thing they focused on was enhancing diversity. Not that there's anything wrong with enhancing diversity, but as you say, as you and I both know, it's not sustainable if you don't have that foundation, because I think of it as like, coming to a dinner party as this new so-called diverse hire, which is a term I absolutely abhor. coming to this situation and finding out that you're the 11th guest to a dinner party where there's only a place setting for 10, and you're kind of wondering, where's my fork and where's my plate and where's my chair? And then you wonder, oh, didn't this leader think about this before they brought me here? So it's really an important concept for people to understand.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I love your call out too around the diverse candidate or diverse employee, and just like, nope, squash that, take it out of your vocabulary. Diversity is a group level measurement. And I see it. Look at me. I just realized, I'm like, how many times have I brought up data in this conversation? Because
yeah, well, you can't help being a nerd, and I love nerds. I spend most of my time these days trying to tell stories to help people understand concepts, but I delight in knowing that the training that we both share has really given me that confidence that I can sort of back that up, and by knowing where the data comes from to support what I say.
Yeah, no, definitely. So are there any ways that you do? I know when we get into that leadership space, I feel like sometimes when we talk about things like inclusion and trying to help leaders find this space, they assume it's very fluffy. And to some extent, there are fluffy moments, right? We got to learn how to navigate our feelings and emotions and how we're treating people. But we do have the scientific background, and I love that you tie research in. So can you tell me a bit more about how you use research or data in your work in helping these leaders build their skills?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, because you focus on the measurement of the elements that one can use to understand what outcomes you're getting from this work, I think that's a very important part of all of what we're talking about here, because very often people are talking about some social characteristics or identity characteristics or something that they don't understand, and they're not necessarily realizing that what they ought to be doing is thinking about, well, what are the behavioral elements and levers that they can push to get to a certain outcome, which you can then measure using inclusalytics. But when I talk to leaders about this idea, there are a couple of things I say that appear to help them understand what I'm trying to convey. First of all, of course, I assume that the leaders I'm talking to understand that these are important issues. They're important issues, and they shouldn't be brushed under the rug or ignored or taboo, because the reality of the experiences that a wide cross section of Americans, and then by definition employees, have is an experience that varies as a function of sometimes of their physical characteristics. We wish it weren't so. We wish there wasn't racism and sexism and ageism and ableism and homophobia and xenophobia. We wish we did that those things did not exist, but they do. And so we experience them in the workplace. And so I say that, in fact, rather than just thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as this idea that you really don't understand, focus on respect. If there was one outcome that I wish more organizations drove to, it would be this idea of respect for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's a little easier for most people to understand, and it can be measured, and it can be built into values of an organization. But what does respect have to do with anything? Well, it's because I know that the outcome, that what people are really looking for, apart from, as you say, diversity in terms of absolute numbers, they're looking for comfort in their day-to-day interactions with the people with whom they work. That's what any of us is looking for, and that's what our customers want. We want that comfort, but you can't really get to comfort in these interactions until you start with some curiosity that can build connection in your interactions at the individual level, and also sort of at the cultural level in an organization. So you have to really start with this, what I call just sort of this bottom line idea, that you have to have respect as a requirement for every interaction. Because, if I'm an applicant, from the time I interact with your first recruiter, in fact, from the time I go to your website, I have a sense of, do these people respect me as an individual? Do they respect applicants? And then it continues. And what do I mean by respect? This driver of trust, this driver of connection and inclusion. I mean, do individuals feel seen, heard, and valued? Seen, heard, and valued. So most people, when they think about respect, are focusing on the sort of the interpersonal aspects, like, did I feel like this person liked me and, they want me around and so on. Well, that's fine. That's important. That's an entry ticket. You have to have that. But when I think about being seen, it's really also about just sort of acknowledging my humanity. The being heard is about making space for my ideas, for giving me credit for the ideas, for allowing my ideas to influence the way things are done, so that I feel like I'm a part of this activity, this enterprise, this team, and making a difference, and that my manager is listening. And then the being valued is not just about money, although equal pay would be a critical part of that, but it's also about recognition for the contributions I make, allowing me to be more visible in the workplace and more visible to clients, especially those clients that have the biggest impact on the company's revenue, and so on and so on and so on. Seen, heard, and valued. When I talk about that, I think it makes it a little bit easier for leaders to understand what I'm trying to say. And I have found as well in my research that the term respect has a little bit more resonance than belonging, which, well, there are a lot of things that challenge me with the belonging concept. And so I talk about respect. And that comes from the literature about respect and also the literature about the relationship between respect and building trust.
Yeah, I love that angle of respect. And it's actually something that I tend to lean into myself when encountering people who are, let's say, uncomfortable with covering diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So you're in that training, that workshop, that conversation, and you're explaining what this means and why it's important. And I don't know about you, but I feel like inevitably there's always that person that's like, well, I just treat people well. Like, I was raised to be respectful. And my response is always, you are correct. That is at the core of this work. I'm so glad you understand what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
We're making sure people understand how to be respectful and how that can have an impact when we're not respectful, right? And all of a sudden they're like, oh, right? Like, that didn't go how I thought. So I love using it as a tool to understand,
Yes.
because like you said, people understand that word respect.
Yeah, and you know what? The funny thing about it is it's something, not, well, it's not funny. We all want it. It's a universal desire, right? That's another nice thing about this. This is not something for the brown people, the tall people, the square people. This is a universal desire. But what I'm seeing in the research is that clearly we are not exhibiting it. When I think about this issue, in fact, nowadays I have more examples of what I mean by this than ever before in the social sphere. Never mind the business sphere, because there are many examples in the business sphere. But in the social sphere, for example, how could it possibly be that someone could be performing in a concert on a stage, and then the person in that audience could be throwing a cup of fluid at them, a drink or a cell phone? I'm like, you know what? There's something happening here where we're not understanding what respect is all about. So strangely, even though respect is one of these concepts that we talk about, we use it a lot. I have concluded that most people do not understand, number one, what it is, nor do they understand when they are exhibiting it or when they're not, because respect is really in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Well, and I think to take that even one step further is, I think over time, especially given technology and social media and things like that, is the more we lean into this space, people are forgetting humanity at its core, whether that's an organization just thinking, like we're all machines working for them, or whether it's just how we see and interact with people on a day-to-day. We forget that we are all people. We are all humans.
That's it.
And every human deserves that respect. And once you lose that, when you can make this person who's anonymous, right? Because I think that's a large part of it too, that anonymity, whether
Yes.
it's you are anonymous to them or they are anonymous to you, all of a sudden that understanding of humanity goes away, and now we can be disrespectful.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you do that, if you aren't mindful about the humanity, about each person that is in your space, if you're not mindful, before you know it, what you're doing, you find yourself doing behaviors that, you know how sometimes I once had this situation, Sertrice, where I had a dinner party, just literally happened to me. And at the end of the night, I had these dirty dishes and silver. I had so much stuff. And I decided I'm going to be efficient. I'm going to at least clear, there are certain things I'm going to do tonight. Tomorrow I'll worry about the rest. But let me get the things into the dishwasher and so on. So I grabbed up all the silverware And then I also had a bag with trash in my hand. And somehow I threw the silverware into the trash, and I took the trash bag and I put it in the kitchen. I did not realize it until the next day when I'm looking for the silverware, and the silverware was all in the trash. What that was that moment of just mindlessly processing something. And so you do things, you don't realize what you have done. I see the same thing with regard to respect, because people will say, oh, I don't know what I did. That person said I did something, and they're saying that it was a microaggression, or a subtle act of exclusion, which is actually the term I prefer from Tiffany Jana's work. And they're so sensitive. I don't know what I did. Whenever I hear that, I know that that person is sincere in the sense that they didn't intend to do something harmful. I believe that. That's all what I think. But what I also assume is that they aren't processing humanity. So they've done something. They've thrown the silverware into the trash through some careless comment that wasn't intended, and it's harmful to the other party. So we've got to be mindful about how we're interacting with everyone in our space.
Yeah, no, 100%. So that being said, curious if you have any tools that you would recommend to people who are looking to focus on respect and leading inclusively.
Yeah, I do. First of all, I should say that my focus on respect wasn't something that I have always had. It came about in 2020 when I interviewed and surveyed working Americans and asked them, one of the questions I asked in both the survey and in the interviews was, what would you like the leaders of your organization to know about the experience that you're having in your organization from an inclusion perspective? That was one question. And when I content analyzed and themed the responses, I noticed that there were a lot of themes that had to do with respect and disrespect. And further, the other thing I noticed was that this was across races, and ethnicities. Everybody said these things. But what I also noticed was that Black employees, when they answered those very same questions, their responses were very behaviorally specific, and they weren't focused on feeling ignored, or just the interpersonal aspects of respect. They were really focused on specific outcomes that they desired in an organization. And when they saw that their managers were not providing those outcomes, that was part of what they defined as disrespect. So for example, if I don't get access to the promotion, or my pay isn't fair, or people don't include me in critical conversations, or I never get the high visibility role, these are all behaviors under control of leaders that those employees were sort of categorizing into this respect bucket. So what I have created is a little ebook, which is available to anyone who is interested in getting that ebook for free. But it's on the front page of my website. If you go there, there's a form. You put in your name and your email address so that it can be sent to you. And that ebook includes a little bit about the research, but very specifically some ideas about how you might measure respect for use in a dashboard, or for use in an employee survey, or just even in interactions with your colleagues.
I love that. And I am going to drop a link actually to your website in the chat, just so everybody can have access to that, and remember to check that out, because I know I am going to check it out and dig deeper into this. I love talking about this. So, and who doesn't love a free resource? So thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with everybody.
I'm not sure if you want to put the www. It should work. I'm not 100% sure from a technical perspective, but GenaCox.com is definitely the website.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's good. That's how it pulls
Perfect.
the browser, so we should be all set.
Perfect.
Sometimes technology, it does weird things. I never know
Yes.
what's
I know.
Oh, yes. Well, so that's good. So we have we have the book that you wrote, Inclusion. Leading Inclusion. Now you just mentioned this free ebook that you have that people can use. So you do a lot of writing. How else do you like to get your knowledge and expertise out there for everyone to experience if they want to hear more from you?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can reach out to me. You can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on my website, contact@genacox.com. Gena is Gena with an E, Gena. I'm very easy to get a hold of. So anyone who wants to get a hold of me will find that it's very easy. What I love to do is I have really decided in the last 3 years or so that, my focus is on getting leaders in particular to have conversations about this topic in such a way that they then identify one or two actions that they can take that will make a meaningful difference, or as I put it, drive change that employees can see and feel. Because this is not, as you say, not just about the numbers. This is about the experience. And um, believe it or not, when inclusion, well, I think by now leaders understand that inclusion drives employee retention. And the opposite of that, the obverse of that is that when it's not present, it's hard to keep the best talent.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love that. And I could listen to you talk all day. This has been a
Oh,
fun conversation.
good.
So do you do a lot of speaking? Do you put videos out? I know you have the book. What else do you have? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely do. I'm available for speaking. I do a lot of speaking. In fact, it's the primary way that I share these ideas, and so I'm available to speak on, in directly in my clients' companies, directly with leaders. I do training with executives and leaders. Sometimes I'm asked to come in and work with ERG leaders, or with helping an organization to articulate or define a strategy, an inclusion strategy that's meaningful. So for any of those things, to be on a panel discussion, to be on a fireside chat, any of those things, I'm available to do. But I would say the most important thing for people to know about me is that um, this is a topic where I think it is really important for people to sort of let their guard down and just have human conversations about it. And so I would say that my superpower in this regard is that there probably isn't anything I haven't heard. I mean, I've heard a gamut of things about this topic. And I'm very comfortable when people ask questions. Like, for example, one time someone came up to me at the end of a conversation and said, I have a Black woman on my team and I'm not sure how to lead her. I don't know what to say. And I processed it very quickly and I smiled and I said, "Oh my gosh, somebody has sold you a bill of goods in your training." Because let me tell you, Black people, green people, pink people don't need anything special. We don't need anything special. We just need the same support, respect, all these other things that perhaps we haven't been receiving in an environment where we know it is available to others. Um, and I can say that in a way that lets a person know I'm not judging you, because actually, I think a lot of these challenges come from undertrained leaders. And so there's an opportunity for all of us to learn more and do better.
Yeah, no, we can always be learning. I know that's something I tell people when I'm presenting, because when you get labeled as a DEI practitioner or DEI expert or whatever, which, we can talk about using the term expert, but people just assume like, oh, you know everything or you get it right all the time. And I think we need to remember to give ourselves space for getting it wrong, because we're all human and we're all going to make mistakes and we're all going to fall into, bad habits at times. And it's also a very complex space. The world has billions of people. We're all different and we have different needs,
Yes.
and how we interact is going to vary. And so I think that's something I always try to remind myself and other DEI practitioners is like, we're it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to take breaks, because this work can be exhausting as well.
Yes. And there really is, as you say, there really is. I mean, the environment, especially nowadays, the environment in which this work is done is extremely dynamic. So anyone who thinks they have all the answers is going to quickly discover that they're, selling themselves short, and they're probably, going to make more mistakes than if they took the attitude that you take, which is you need to constantly be learning. I actually did a video today. Thank you for reminding me. I actually did a video today that I posted on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and it will be on my website too by the end of the day. A short video that I call a love letter to DE&I professionals, because frankly, I've been thinking about DE&I professionals nonstop for the last several months, ever since the Supreme Court invalidated the use of affirmative action in college selection. It's not had nothing to do with this work in corporate America directly, but it had a lot to do with this work in corporate America because we know of the ripple effect and we know that some leaders have backed away. So I just did this video to say to leaders, to say to DE&I professionals, I see you, I feel you, I appreciate you, and you just keep doing the things that you need to do because you're going to get support, and this isn't going to go away. It's never going to get easy. However, the leaders that I've been talking to, yes, there are some leaders who have been backing away, but the leaders that I've been talking to are really looking for the ways to move forward. They're looking for solutions. And what I say to them is make sure they include you in those conversations and don't just go to the legal department for their decisions, their advice about how they're going to move forward.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's a whole conversation in itself, right? How do you
Yes.
navigate trying to do this work, but also working with your legal department?
That's right.
But no time for that today. And I do love too your angle of, or your perspective that this work is still happening, because I feel like there has been this, like, everywhere I look, is DEI dead? It's over, it's ending. And sure, there are some companies who have stepped back, some leaders who have taken this chance, but they're the ones who weren't fully committed in the first place.
Yes.
I still have plenty of clients who are willing to do this work, and we have people coming and asking us for information all the time. So I don't think by any means that it's completely, magically just, nope, we did it. That one decision just completely stopped. Yeah, we're still moving forward.
Yeah. In fact, I should say one thing. I can't let that go. I should say one thing. And that is, I've heard some leaders have said to me, the reason we're tentative about this is because we're afraid of legal risk. And when someone says to me, I have now my response, because my response is just based on what I observed, which is, when you say you're afraid of taking legal risk, I just want you to remember one thing. What that in effect means is that you're asking minoritized people and underrepresented people to take all the risk. We've been taking all the risk all the time, all along. And so your involvement in this, rather than thinking of this as risk taken on your part, think of it as contributing to removing some of the risk that actually people of color and LGBTQ plus and so on are taking all the time. In fact, just this weekend, a woman was killed in California just because she had a pride flag outside her business. I can't believe I'm saying those words, right? This is a big deal because these experiences persist, and we've got to do everything we can to be part of the solution.
Yeah, something I want to do a study on too, because anecdotally, in speaking with practitioners and the work that I've done, I always love the legal question, because when people do this work, they want to take a data-driven approach. They're putting in the efforts. They magically think once they start doing that, they're going to get sued and it's going to have all these legal issues. But I feel like I've seen the opposite. I feel like once they're doing the work, the employees are like, oh, great, thank you for trying. I'll give you a little bit of space and grace to get this done, as long as you're meaningfully putting actions
good intentions.
Together. Right. But when you aren't doing the work, that's when you're getting sued, because they're like, I'm fed up, I'm done. And so the very thing they're afraid of, like, if they were to just do the work, they could avoid that legal risk.
Absolutely.
And, right. I wish I say that anecdotally, and one of these days I'm going to find a way to, like, pull together this research, because I feel like it's valid just by the conversations I have with other practitioners too. But anyways, I just looked at the time. I want to get ready to wrap us up here. But before I do, I have one final question for you. And I think it fits really well. We talked about humanity earlier, and this is Better Humans at Work. So if you had any final thoughts on what organizations or leaders can be doing to help create better humans at work in their organizations.
Yeah. So I'm going to repeat myself. I'm going to say, focus on the outcome of respect. Focus on respect. Require it in everything that you do in your business. Make it one of your core values if you can. Require it of your leaders and your managers in the way that they work with their teams and, of course, with their customers. Require it of employees as they work with one another. It sounds like a very simple idea, but what actually happens is that if you focus on making sure that everyone feels seen, heard, and valued, which is my definition of respect for this kind of context, what you will discover is that hopefully it will give people just that second, that pause, that beat where they say, what can I do to build, to sort of build a comfort with this person, as opposed to avoiding them or as opposed to making their lives difficult? Because guess what? We're all still humans. And that's really that's it. That's really all there is. There's nothing more to organizational life than that simple fact.
Definitely. Oh, I love that so much. This has been fun. I feel like we could talk forever. Maybe we'll have to have you on another episode and dig deeper. But thank you again so much, Gena, for being here with us today and speaking on the topic of inclusive leadership and also really digging into respect. It's been a great conversation. And thank you to those of you who joined us live today, or if you're watching on the replay, have a great rest of your afternoon.
Absolutely. And thank you, and thank your audience for joining us.